Thanks so much for joining us today. We are talking about gold carding, which is a topic on every payer's mind. This session will explore state-specific regulations, the potential value of gold carding for payers and providers, and common challenges like identifying eligible providers and managing gold card programs. We'll cover effective communication strategies to ensure providers understand their gold card status, and our strategic approach section will guide you on setting goals and ROI metrics before implementing a program. So before we dig into the topics at hand, I want to introduce our co-hosts, our speakers today, Michael Lenzer with Itiliti Health, Vikas Garg with ZS, and Andrew Bornstein with ZS. Welcome to all three of you.
Thank you, Courtney.
Sure.
Michael, do you want to give a little introduction to who you are and what you do?
Sure. Thank you, Courtney. I'm Michael Lunzer. I'm the CEO and founder of Itiliti Health. We're very focused on streamlining and automating the prior authorization process. We tend to sell to the payer, but really deliver significant value in streamlining that process for both the payer and the provider, and ultimately bring a lot of value to the member. And our interest today is we're really focused in on helping to communicate the gold carding status to particular providers and making it easy for the payer and the provider to manage that communication. And I'm really excited to hear from ZS about their role in helping to identify and manage those gold carded providers.
Vikas, would you like to give us an intro to you and what you do?
Yeah, thanks, Courtney. Vikas Garg, I'm a partner with ZS Associates, and ZS is primarily a healthcare consulting services company. We are about 15,000 people across 40 different offices in all geographies. I primarily have been here for the last 3 years, and I'm a partner in our health plan and provider practice. And I've been a consultant in payer provider operations for the last 25 years. And I focus largely on CM, provider partnerships, and all the topics that payers and providers, functions that payers and providers use to manage cost and quality of healthcare. I'm super excited to be talking about gold carding today.
Great. And Andrew?
Sure, thanks, Courtney. I'm Andrew Bornstein. I'm a consultant with ZS. I've been with ZS for about 3 years now. I'm working closely on our utilization management, our care management offerings, and some perspectives on gold carding that I'm excited to talk about today. But I'd come from the industry. I was with the United Health Group for about 8 years prior, both with Optum and United Healthcare, doing a variety of different health plan activities, some payment integrity analytics, reimbursement analytics, and then on the UHC side, some benefit design, benefit consulting. So have really been excited to be in sort of the utilization management world, and there's a lot that we need to address in that area. So we're excited to sort of share our thoughts and our perspectives on these.
It's great to have everyone here today to talk a little bit more about this topic. Before we dig into some of the challenges and solutions, Andrew, would you want to give us a little overview on the state of gold carding right now?
Sure. So gold carding, it's really becoming a trending topic for health plans. We've heard from a lot of plans that understand that there are a lot of regulations that are coming down the pipelines in regards to gold carding. So currently there are about 13 states that have active gold carding bills in process, about 5 states that have instituted state regulations on gold card. And I think payers are starting to realize that, we need to figure out how do we design a gold carding program and manage that gold carding program so that it's providing value for, not only internally for the payer, but also helping the providers, helping our members as well. So, I think one thing that plans are looking for, though, is how do we design these programs to meet these regulations? And that has become difficult with each state having a different type of regulation that they're instituting, ranging from some that are broader and just have some rough guidelines around how you're going to put gold carding into your prior auth and your programs, all the way to very, very prescriptive type gold carding regulations. I know there are some states that Wyoming has instituted a regulation that gives very defined percentages and rates to which you want to gold card the providers that are in the network of the health plan. So for any provider that submits a prior auth request for at least 5 services within a year period, as long as 80% of those are approved, they automatically get gold carding for a year after that. So it's really important for health plans to sort of figure out how are they going to remain compliant, but also do so in a very smart, data-driven, nimble way, so you can make sure we're getting the most value and providing the most value for our providers and members as well.
That's super helpful to understand the regulatory side of what's happening. There's also a secondary side of this that relates back to how gold carding can create more value for payers outside of regulation. Vikas, would you like to tackle that?
Yeah, sure. And it actually helps payers, providers, and members, all different constituents. So it's actually a great thing to be for the I guess regulators to push. So for health plans specifically, what we know that on an average it costs anywhere between $7.50 to $15 for payers to process a prior authorization. So it's an expensive proposition, and a lot of these prior auths are approved almost 90% of the times. So for payers to streamline through gold carding certain providers who who are sticking by the rules, it actually lowers the administrative cost for payers and increases their operational efficiencies, and also creates better provider relationships for them. And then on the provider side, it actually helps providers lower their administrative burden as well, because we know on an average, a provider spends close to 20 hours per week, either the physician themselves or their office staff, 20 hours a week on prior authorization tasks. So if the payers were to gold card them, it really saves providers that administrative burden, that it's actually helps reduce the burnout that a lot of providers are facing, given the increasing demands on them. And then clearly, I mean, in the middle of all this, member also gets faster access to the necessary care. If some of these, I guess, hurdles or mother may I kind of requests from a provider are removed from the ecosystem.
Do you think that improves patient satisfaction scores?
It clearly does. Like we see a lot of times members complain that the access is getting restricted given the requirements from different payers, and then they hear from their providers that the reason they can't get the services because there's a prior authorization. I think removing that certainly gets members service quicker, and that helps their satisfaction, and that shows up in the member satisfaction surveys.
That's so interesting. And I know that all three of you have seen situations where payers have brought in gold carding or started gold carding programs for various reasons. Michael, do you have any examples that come to mind of gold carding programs that stand out as being super successful or maybe less successful?
Well, I don't have any specific examples, I guess, of those two sides of the equation, but I can tell you that there are some best practices that have been found to make a big difference for payers. And it really revolves around the idea that creating a gold carding program costs money for the payer, right? They have to do some analysis and they have to put some rigor into it, which is should definitely provide a significant return on investment as long as providers know they're gold carded and then don't do the normal prior authorization processes, even though they're gold carded, right?
Yeah.
So from an Itiliti Health perspective, what we've found is really important is to create a really good communication strategy that helps providers not only to hear that they're gold carded up front, but if you think about it, a provider doesn't have a dashboard in their system that tells them if they're gold carded. The normal gold carding programs are built where the payer sends a wonderful letter to the provider and says, congratulations, you're gold carded for these procedures, for these products within the health plan's suite of products. But the provider doesn't have a good place to put that. So from an Itiliti Health perspective, we're really focused on making sure that there's a good way to communicate that information every time the provider wants to think about whether or not they should give a prior authorization.
That brings up a really great point. There are some common challenges that payers face with implementing these programs, and that's a big piece of what we wanted to talk about today. So that was a nice lead in to that part of the conversation. Anything that you can think of, Vikas and Andrew, that maybe also contribute to those challenges that payers face with implementing these types of programs?
Yeah, there's definitely a few that we've noticed within the industry. I think Michael had said, the notification and understanding when you're gold carded and gold carded for what definitely is a big issue that we've been hearing from different payers and is actually causing a lot more confusion and more burden within the process than it is saving, which is the intention of the gold carding program itself. But when we have that notification process and everything working well, I think there's still some questions on how do you both design and manage your gold carding program itself. So really the first component that we've been seeing as a challenge is how do we know what criteria we're going to use to determine which providers that we want to gold card. Not only taking whatever regulations and compliance issues, like making sure that we're being compliant with those regulations, but also how can we be more data driven to make these decisions that are going to provide the most ROI for our plan. So currently, we were talking about before what examples we've been seeing of health plans and how they're doing gold carding. So we've done our research into a few different large national plans. So United Healthcare's Gold Card program, Aetna is a Gold Standard program, Cigna Collaborative Care Gold Card program. All of these generally are looking at the same type of information to determine their gold carding provider status. So they're really looking at what are the quality scores, what are the approval rates of their prior auth requests. And while those are two criteria that are useful for helping make decisions on gold carding, there's a whole lot of other factors that many health plans aren't considering these days. So, some things like the actual cost of the services that they provide. How long does it take to review a prior auth request? There are some types of services like behavioral health services historically that take a lot longer to review a single request than others. So really taking into consideration everything that goes into the cost of reviewing every prior auth versus what is the value that you're getting and the potential cost and inappropriate outcomes of the services that might happen from approving something that shouldn't have been approved. So what's at risk for the payer itself as they're deciding on the gold carding. So I think at CES we have thought through a lot of these the criteria and have a model for determining and scoring these providers to determine who is the most appropriate providers to gold card and for which services. So that's one area is really how do you determine who the gold carded providers are. And then another big piece of missing information that a lot of health plans currently have is for those providers that are currently gold carded, how do you track them to make sure that, now that they have this free pass to do these services without requiring authorization, how are we making sure that these providers are still, doing appropriate services, utilizing these services appropriately, and not sort of trying to take advantage of that system and increase their like the amount of services that they conduct, even if they're not appropriate for a particular patient. So how do you, because you're not getting these requests in from the provider anymore, you really can't do an audit and see, let's pick out a few and see if it still would be approved. So health plans currently, what they do is they sort of just randomly pick out a few different providers and just audit a couple health records and determine if they're still meeting the criteria that's needed to be gold carded. But what we're seeing is this is a very inefficient process. There's really no rigor or no information or data behind which providers that they're pulling out randomly, and is just adding more burden and not really having a smart approach to how you're managing those providers. So, I guess one way that we're suggesting or thinking that we can resolve that is really taking a statistical approach to review or to managing providers who are gold carded to see if there's any statistically significant increase in utilization or spend for these types of services, which would then trigger the need to potentially audit a provider to see if they're still meeting criteria. So that's sort of a model that we've come up with to help payers just be really efficient on how they're managing, and then also saving costs for themselves while also making sure that the gold carded providers are still appropriately utilizing services.
I'd like to ask a question that I think I heard in the first part of your perspective on determining whether somebody should be gold carded. And I think what I heard you say, which is really, I'd never heard anybody position it this way before, but that, when a regulatory body requires gold carding for a region, the health insurance company is going to put initiative and investment into their gold carding process and analytics. And there is an opportunity for them at that point to make it even more efficient by maybe expanding gold carding to providers that might not be gold carded under the regulatory perspective, but might still be viable to reduce cost and improve service if they gold card other classes of providers that maybe meet other criteria that they themselves set. And I hadn't looked at it that way. And I guess is that something that you can help with from a depth of analytics and ability to look at their provider base?
Yes, yeah, and that's exactly right. The way we feel about the regulations is that is the bare minimum that you need in order to institute your gold card program. That's not going to capture the full value of savings that you can generate from your gold carding program. So step one will make sure you're meeting regulations, but then step two and beyond is how do you enhance that program? How do you enrich it with data and predict who's going to be the best candidate for gold carding based on the wide amount of criteria that is available to health plans, because there are a lot of data sources that, while they may not seem to be so specifically related to gold card, there's a lot of really good, rich information that can help at least steer the direction of which providers should be gold carded or not, way beyond the regulatory environment.
Makes sense.
That's an interesting perspective too for prior auth in general, just that there are all of these regulations that have been put in place, but you really need to marry the concept of meeting the regulatory environment and also looking at what is the ROI that you're getting from the tools that you're putting in place.
Exactly. And just to add to what Andrew said, there is also, I guess, additional things we are saying where payers are using this gold carding as a mechanism to maybe encourage providers to adopt some electronic kind of submissions. So making sure that you are thinking through it as a whole, sort of if there's value the provider is getting from getting gold carded, could you also add in certain requirements from a payer perspective for the adoption of these more efficient ways to communicate. So we're seeing that added kind of criteria or added responsibilities for being gold carded is the payer is requiring them to use maybe more efficient channels for the things that they're not gold carded for example.
Do you think that there will be more regulation put in place around gold carding, more stringent regulation, or do you think it will stay kind of at this foundational level?
I have a perspective on it, and you can never tell with the regulators, but I do feel we're going to see more of these regulations because definitely there's a lot of press in the out there around because the burden that is creating on providers, and I know Itiliti Health has sort of, you guys have perspective on just the abrasion the creates. So I think so the regulators are responding to that, and as we also see as more and more lives are going to kind of manage lives, especially on Medicare, there's putting more and more burden on providers to now people maybe who are in Medicare fee-for-service are now Medicare Advantage. So there's more burden that providers have to face, and they're asking for relief on some of these. So I think there's going to be, and it's a great tool, as we're discussing, for both payers and providers to also transform their operations. So I personally feel there's going to be more and more regulations that we will see.
And I would say that I would agree with that. And it's the whole bundle of things that are being pushed from a government regulatory perspective around prior authorizations. It's just too inefficient today. It's like not even in the 1980s of technology. And so we really need to see change. And the regulators have recognized that this is an opportunity to fix a problem, that if the payers and providers don't do it, they will, right? So gold carding is a nod to something providers have asked for. I think we're going to start to see more push on electronic transactions, which is first being forced on payers, but eventually will be encouraged, if not forced on providers. We have to get there in order to get to an efficient market, and gold carding is just one of many tools.
Now, I was just going to add on to the regulatory aspect. I think it's new. It's a new concept being introduced through regulations, and as I mentioned before, they're currently on two sides of the spectrum, really, just more guideline driven versus very prescriptive, detailed. You need X number of gold card providers for Y number of years. What I feel is going to happen is there's going to be a determination or seeing what works best, and then more of a regression to a sort of a midline of those two different sides of the spectrum right now. And there's going to be more standardization of how gold carding regulations are going to be instituted throughout the states. So I think just it's very wide right now, figuring out how does it work, what works best, and then just rationalizing. In a few years, we'll see that sort of come together.
I think that's what we're seeing in prior authorization as a whole. Would you agree, Michael? Is that it's kind of a broad set of regulations for the industry at large, and the direction that the industry is going is creating more standardized approaches to prior auth in the future, or that's kind of what we anticipate will happen?
Yeah, you have the regulators kind of pushing for certain concepts, and then you have innovators trying to improve on those concepts or do derivatives of them that meet the requirement, but also improve upon those things. And like any industry, I think we'll see some various approaches until we find an approach that's really a winner, and then you'll see more and more adoption of a similar concept, right? just like gold carding is going to kind of find its sweet spot.
Yeah. So as we're kind of talking about the first phase of implementing gold carding at a payer, what are some things that folks should think about before they implement a new program? Are there any to-dos that they should put on their to-do list that they should be doing now before they actually implement a program, or things they should be considering, or teams they should be assembling?
Yeah, for sure they should be, and you can't just turn a switch on the gold carded program and expect everything to, seamlessly just get stood up and operate efficiently. You need to really put the foundations in place and lay that sort of framework that you're going to build the gold carding program off of. So there's really, there's three different components of it that I think you really need to address initially before you actually put it into operations. So there needs to be just internal strategic alignment. So what are the goals that you have in place? What do you want to achieve? What are your objectives as an organization that you're trying to reach through your gold carding program? I think there needs to be really that guiding North Star that everybody knows, okay, this is what we're trying to get towards. And then having that as sort of the pathway through which you're going to take your gold carding program is really important to have everybody on board on the same page with that initially. So really just a strategic alignment through the internal teams. The second item is really also internally. There needs to be alignment just within other types of departments within the health plan itself. So gold carding might seem like it's a utilization management function, but it has ripple effects to claims, to benefits, to provider relations. So you need to make sure that any program that you set up, it's going to be set up to also account for what needs to happen on the claims side. How are claims that come in going to know, and how's that adjudication system going to know that it's a gold carded provider and not deny a claim for no auth if that provider is gold carded. So all of the internal departments need to be on board and need to be considered with what impact that gold card program is going to have on each of those operations. And then the third thing is really just the operational capabilities of the organization. You need that, as we discussed before, that team of analysts and data analysts who are going to make those decisions or make the recommendations on the criteria that you're going to use, the providers that should be gold carded, the gold card providers that need to be audited and looked at. And then what does that governance structure really look like internally? And then also how does it actually get put into place? So how do the notifications happen? How do the updates to the systems and the letters go out that are generated going to happen? So everybody within the UM program needs to be on board and understand and be trained on what's going to happen. How's your process from today going to change when this comes into place? Just making sure you're prepared for that so that when you do launch the program, you're ready to go efficiently and smoothly from day one.
That sounds like a really big lift.
It does.
So what's interesting to me about that is that's why you're here, right? So just to give a little commercial, Itiliti and ZS partner together because we have customers that want tools to communicate gold carding, and they want help with this meaningful amount of work that's necessary to get gold carding stood up. And so when you look at that spectrum of activities, Andrew, what kind of a role does ZS play in that process?
So, we play, I think that actually is a good sort of segue into how do we launch the program itself. So we do have some analytics tools and capabilities that can guide those decisions, but we also have a framework in place that we can use to help step by step the health plan make sure that they're covering each activity as they're taking that roadmap to turning on the gold card process. But I'll let Vikas walk through sort of what that approach is and the different phases within there.
Yeah, I'm happy to. And maybe I'll share a quick summary of sort of what that approach looks like. So it's largely a 6-step process, and as Michael, you and Andrew suggested, a lot of payers just jump to the implementation piece right away. I think what we advise our client is to spend some time ahead of the implementation to start thinking about just an overall strategic alignment. So get maybe some multidisciplinary steering committee set up to just make some decisions around, are you going to just implement what's required by the regulation, or should we expand it? So the question like that should be asked, and then making sure that all the different teams that are touching providers and members are aware of this program, and make sure there's coordination throughout the design and development. So a very important step is this number one step is around the strategic alignment on what this gold program will be and will not be, and then who will be involved in the implementation, and making sure we are bringing this strategic our steering committee back multiple times throughout the implementation. Second biggest thing is the program design, and that's exactly what Andrew was talking about, is how do you design the program? What is the selection criteria? What are the different systems that need to get updated? And it's beyond just the prior auth system. So the claim system needs to get updated. Maybe the provider contracts need to get updated. So just taking a kind of a overall view on like what all systems need to change from a payer perspective, and then make a more comprehensive plan on sort of how do you implement. So that leads us to an implementation phase, which is where we work with all the different tools that for example, Itility's tool is super helpful in making sure we are communicating with the providers about the new I guess the gold carding requirements. And then going into a pre-launch, making sure sort of all the teams are trained and on the program, and then launching it. And then having a post-launch plan to just making sure you're monitoring the launch for a minimum number of time with more dedicated resources, just to make sure that things are humming.
And just a quick question, do you provide kind of a facilitation role with each of those steps as you work through the process with your
payers? We have a very defined framework around sort of what steering committee needs to be, what the meeting cadence should be, and we definitely facilitate the process from strategic design all the way to the post-launch, including setting up a war room during the launch and the post-launch phases.
That's great. We have a lot of payer customers that, some are larger, and these multidisciplinary teams are quite large. And then some where the teams, if you will, that you've laid out in your concepts are fairly small. And so it really is helpful to have a facilitator that walks the customer through these steps, so they're not forgetting anything, and they can get through the process more efficiently rather than having to think through this process and then execute.
Yeah, that's definitely our intention.
So I know Itiliti and ZS work pretty cohesively together. Can you tell us just a little bit more about that, how the companies work together and how the technology works together?
Sure. So we work together a lot in customer or prospect health plan relationships, where either we have a customer that's interested in gold carding technology from Itiliti Health, or a customer that's interested in the process of how do we determine which provider should be gold carded, how do we use analytics, and how do we continually monitor that. When we have those kinds of customers, we introduce them to ZS. And when ZS has customers that are using gold carding intelligence from ZS, then they bring Itiliti in. And again, just to define the roles, Itiliti's function is really to help communicate to the provider what their rules are for any given member, date of service, and procedure code. Because each member belongs to a product from the health plan, be it Medicare, Medicaid, commercial, fully insured or self-insured through the employer. And each of them have different rules. And some of those may facilitate or use the gold carding, some of them may not. And so as a provider trying to do business in this very complex, multi-discipline environment, they need a quick way to be able to know for this member, this date of service, and this group of CPT codes, what are the rules for XYZ health plan? Am I gold carded? Do I need a prior authorization? If I do, what do I need to submit, etc.? And so that's Itiliti Health's role. So as we work with ZS, we can present the full list of prior auth requirements from the health plan, and they can turn around through their analytics and give us the indication of who's gold carded for which dates. That information is then loaded into Itiliti Health on an ongoing basis. And now, as a provider, my experience is I go either to a website or I can go right into my EMR with an EMR that's connected to the new CMS API requirements. I can go in and enter in some base information and ask the question, does this require a prior authorization? And this system will quickly tell them yes or no, or maybe it'll tell them no, because you're gold carded for this procedure. And that's really important because, again, they may be gold carded for 10 procedures and not for others. So it's important that this system be really accurate so that they know for each procedure what the rules are. And that's what Itiliti Health's function is to help maintain that data in a system that's transactional and accurate.
So it sounds like something that would be very complicated to build on your own and maybe easier to implement using a solution that's already pre-created.
Exactly.
Any other final thoughts that we should share with our audience on gold carding today?
I would say that those a lot of health plans are already thinking about it. Others are probably just waiting for the regulators to come. I think one of the things that we always talk about is it's better to start designing things before regulators sort of force your hand. So I think it's important for all the payers to start thinking about gold carding, and also those multi-state payers to even think about, because there will be multiple different regulations. How do you create kind of a program that can be administered across different states? So I think that's kind of what our message has been with our payer clients, is to start now and so that you're not just responding to the regulators, but designing it based on kind of your own needs and for the provider's need in your markets.
Yeah, and I would say that kind of leads into the whole concept of embracing some of this change rather than waiting for it to happen to you. Because as Andrew said, if gold carding is coming, you might as well put that work in and get more value from it. Similarly, when gold carding happens, if you don't execute it effectively, it can actually increase your burden and your provider's burden. As an example, if you don't have an easy way for providers to quickly know if they're gold carded on a day-to-day basis, they will increase your telephone calls, and you'll then increase the number of prior auths that you get for things that don't actually require them. So you're losing the value. So it's really important to embrace this process, I think, and plan it and do it with experts that have seen some of the other challenges people have had before. Otherwise, you're bound to repeat the same mistakes others have already followed. So.
Yeah, I think there's an opportunity also to be sort of that innovator as a health plan. I don't think there's been anybody that has, had this solution, this best-in-class solution for gold carding program. So I think health plans can sort of be that first mover or that take the lead that might guide the regulations to show that, hey, this is the way to do it. This works the best. We're getting, lowering our provider abrasion, increasing the the turnaround time of a lot of our requests that come in, reducing delays for members, and really just like showing that value to be the leader in the space.
Absolutely.
So now's the time to act.
Yes, certainly the time to act with all of the regulations coming soon. It was great having all three of you on for our second webinar together. That was fun. If you would like to get in touch with any of our panelists, their contact information is available on a slide in the chat section. And if there are any questions that you have, please feel free to reach out to any of the three panelists on today's event. They are happy to answer them. We will see you guys next time.
Thank you, Courtney.
Thank you.